The fourth speaker is John Reisman, my co-convener. And John's going to talk about context and relevance in climate communication. You ready to go, John?
The reason I wanted to talk about context and relevance is that we're really losing the battle a little bit on getting across past some of the myths. And for example, one of the issues is, I remember John Coleman said, there's only a tiny fraction of CO2 in our atmosphere. Does it make a difference? He doesn't think so. But if you remove that CO2, we have a frozen planet. You can keep all the other greenhouse gases. We literally are frozen at that point. And it's a very small amount of CO2. The other issue in communications, of course, is complexity. And regular humans would look at these formulas and say, well, at the bottom it says forcing equals fish, triangle, T. And that's pretty much it. I mean, they don't get past that. So we have to simplify the message. And I like to talk about the sweater effect. I didn't have a picture of a sweater, sorry. But we put on clothing to keep warm. Okay, you add a little CO2, you keep warm. You take away that CO2 from the planet, it's very cold. And think about a sweater as the troposphere. Because that sweater literally covers your body, and you radiate heat from your body into the sweater. It re-radiates it back towards your body. Above the sweater would be the stratosphere. And there we see, actually, because we're blocking more heat and keeping it from escaping, we're seeing it a little bit cooler. So that's actually a very simple methodology to explain the greenhouse effect. So we need to look for more simple mechanisms to actually explain these things. The relevant issues, and if you bring relevance into the equation, then what happens is people start to understand what it means to us as people, as a society. We have energy economics, resource economics, monetary economics, international and national security. And this all has to do with our standards of living. And it's very important to understand that without science, our standards of living would not be as luxurious as they are today. So science is extremely important, and I don't think we really sing the praises of science enough. The basic planetary systems are earth, wind, fire, and water. We get our energy mainly from the sun. In this, actually, the plants get a lot of energy. We eat the plants. Animals eat plants. We eat animals that eat plants. And that's how we get our energy. Sometimes those plants and animals get buried in the ground, and over millions of years they become oil or coal. In that case, actually, we're burning solar energy in our cars. So we're a solar-powered system already. What's going on with global warming, we see, for example, Admiral Titley already testified this year, 78% of the ice volume lost in the Arctic, it's gone in just the last 30 years, and that's a lot of ice. Of course, as we increased the radiative forcing, then we see the oceans warming up a little bit. 1.66 watts per meter squared. That puts more moisture into the atmosphere. And in doing so, of course, that increases and enhances the greenhouse effect. The CO2 goes into the ocean. Ocean acidification affects plankton, shell life, other systems, and it's affecting vegetation. And that's critical because what we're talking about when we start talking about vegetation is also the crops. The yellow areas on the screen are actually where we grow all our crops. The brown areas are drought events over the last few years. And as the Hadley cell expands, of course, we're going to be impinging more and more on those crop systems. In doing so, of course, we're losing soil moisture content and we're starting to drop crop yields. That's an economics equation. Hurricane intensity increasing and number of named storms also increasing. The soil moisture is a two-edged sword. We're dropping crop yields, and that's already in the numbers. And Chris Field will be here on Friday at the Climate Confluence Issues talk, and he'll be discussing about a lot of these related issues. The other side is that when we lose the soil moisture content, we're increasing our vulnerability to fire. And that, of course, can affect our crops, as we saw in Russia recently. This also changes our net primary production. This is the carbon uptake of the planet. And NASA did 30 years of studies. The first 20 years of that study, actually, they showed that we increased net primary production 6%. The last 10 years, we showed a 1% decrease, and in the analysis I saw on the NASA website, they attributed that to fires and droughts. And this goes to the loss of soil moisture content. This is all about economics. The definition of economics people often misunderstand. It's not about money. It's about the wealth and resources of a country or region. It's about the careful management of those resources and the balance of systems and methods. We have our main economy as our resource economy. And the resources we trade include food and minerals and everything else, and we make products out of all of that. The secondary, or I would say a meta-economy, is our monetary economy, and we're operating on the Keynesian economic model. Why are all these things important? Because we're trying to talk about what's relevant to people in general. And our economy, inflation rates, and our food system is very, very relevant. We have a 2 Celsius limit. This is the speed limit for the planet, and this is a general agreement across the spectrum that if we go past that, we're going to see more serious economic impacts. And Richard Somerville just sent me this chart last week. He calls it the ski slope graph. The first line you see is the 2011 graph. If we start reducing emissions then to stay under the 2C speed limit, then we would have a fairly gentle slope. He calls that the bunny slope. Beyond that, we have the intermediate slope. That's the 2015 line, that's the blue. And the red line is the 2020 line. To stay under the 2C limit, we'd have to actually reduce emissions much faster, and that will have much more serious economic impacts. Why are people confused? It gets cold out. This actually was an El Nino event. People don't really connect the fact that when you raise the temperature of the oceans a little bit, it evaporates more water. More moisture goes into the atmosphere, and what goes up must come down. It's going to come down as rain or snow. If it's wintertime, you're going to get a lot of snow. So we're seeing larger snowstorms. We're seeing larger rainstorms. But we need to get past the dissonance about that, where people are confused, because these are absolutely connected. They say we can't attribute a single climate event, or a weather event, I should say, to climate. Well, think about it. If climate is the car, and CO2 is the driver, weather and natural variation are actually inside the vehicle. I consider them the kids in the back, and they're sometimes restless and sometimes more quiet. But we've changed the radiative forcing, 1.66 watts per meter squared according to IPCC AR4. That adds up to 26 zettajoules per year. So the car is definitely driving down a new road. All weather and all natural variation now occurs on this new climate path. The costs are increasing. If you look at the green line at the end of the chart, you can see that the billion-dollar events from the National Climate Data Center, as of October 2011, have already surpassed all previous records. So there is definitely an economic impact, and we need to pay attention to that, and we need to concentrate on what these things mean to us when we talk about climate change. I wrote a book called Exposing the Climate Hoax. It's all about the economy. And though it seems a little controversial, the reality is there is a hoax going on. And I actually often say there is a small oligarchy of scientists that are trying to trick us. Now, I detail a lot of the arguments that come from, for example, Roger Pielke Sr., Roy Spencer, S. Fred Singer, John Christie, and others, because they're missing context. They often say things like, it's not a big deal, or it won't be a catastrophe. But those words are actually meaningless. They never give you the context of what catastrophe means. We know that if you change the soil moisture content, it's going to impact our crop yields. And that is the issue, and that is an economics issue. Inside the book, I go over a myriad of contexts in various areas: science, economics, energy, environment, security, food, water, and infrastructure. And I like to give a lot of context to infrastructure, because think about the last 10,000 years. We've been in a relatively stable period called the Holocene. So all of our cities and towns have actually been built up during that time. We've changed now the radiative forcing, 1.66 watts per meter squared, and NASA now has us at 1.8. That's actually 29 zettajoules, so we'll see how those numbers play out, but it's a lot of forcing. So that's going to impact our infrastructure in an economic fashion. I go into climate psychology with something I call the real climate gate, and that goes into detailed arguments regarding Sonja Boehmer-Christensen and the energy and environment reports. Also, of course, politics and policy. And science is the basis for policy. If we try to succeed or have policy that doesn't rely on science, we're guessing, we're making ideological decisions, or we're basing this on belief. And that doesn't work for policy. We need to be operating off of the best available information. The Joint Forces Command actually has shown us that we're already running into peak oil. So economics are very critical as well. We have to keep the economy working without breaking it too much, or else we won't get to mitigate things. We won't get to fix things. At this point in time, we're looking at just a few years away, and this is based on supply, demand, and refining capacity. So we have to make sure that we pay attention to the energy scenario as well, because we need to convert the energy economy and infrastructure. Political issues include campaign reform and special interests. And there's a lot of influence from special interests in the political side now. So we need to pay very close attention to that, and how do we actually get past that so we can get back to relevant policy? The risk, of course, is passing the speed limit. And the further we pass the speed limit, the more expensive the fines get. The ski slope gives us a guideline to try and point towards mitigation and policy that will achieve that. The speed limit is 2 degrees Celsius. If we don't stay ahead of it, it's going to get very expensive. We need to pay attention. Thank you.